From Hollywood sound booths to national headlines, a long silent project has suddenly sparked a wave of controversy, and at the center of it stands actor Neal McDonough. Known for his commanding presence and deep commitment to his faith, McDonough has now stepped into the spotlight to defend his unexpected role as Jesus in the newly released Life of Jesus podcast. The release, which emerged nearly 15 years after recording, caught the public and even the actors themselves completely off guard. McDonough says he took the role out of genuine devotion, calling himself a God-fearing American who saw the project as a way to reconnect people with Scripture at a time when, he believes, society is drifting away from its spiritual foundation. His words have ignited both support and criticism, setting the stage for a debate much larger than the podcast itself. McDonough revealed that the original recordings were part of an ambitious audiobook titled The Truth and Life Dramatized Audio Bible, New Testament. At the time, it was simply an artistic project, a dramatized retelling of Scripture using an ensemble cast of respected performers. There was no hint it would later be reshaped into a serialized 52-episode podcast designed for modern digital platforms. Yet Fox Faith resurrected the material this year, packaging it into what it calls an immersive spiritual journey. McDonough insists the podcast serves a real purpose: to help people who feel overwhelmed by the Bible find a more accessible entry point. But the sudden revival has left many questioning whether artistic intent, contractual clarity, and performer consent were truly honored in the process. For several actors involved, the shock was immediate. Kristen Bell, who voiced Mary Magdalene in the original recordings, said she had no idea the project was being relaunched. Her team only learned of the podcast when Fox News contacted them a day before the public announcement, requesting her appearance on air. With major names like Brian Cox, Sean Astin, Malcolm McDowell, Julia Ormond, and John Rhys-Davies attached, the confusion created major ripples across the industry. If these performers were unaware, critics ask, then who exactly approved the project's re-release, and under what authority? Was this simply a matter of old contracts being reused, or a case of a studio taking creative liberties with material the actors believed was long shelved? The questions continue to build, adding layers of skepticism. Fox, however, stands unwavering. The network argues that the original licensing agreements fully allowed for the podcast adaptation and insists the actors' participation was secured at the time of the recordings. In a statement, Fox emphasized its cooperation with Gulfstream Studios, the original producers, leaving no room for doubt in their view. Yet the ethical debate persists. McDonough, meanwhile, remains focused on the podcast's mission rather than the backlash. He says the episodes, stretching from the story of Christmas to the events of Easter, offer a guided journey through the New Testament using expressive performances from an all-star cast. For him, the value lies in making faith approachable, especially for listeners who may feel intimidated by Scripture but still seek meaning, comfort, or connection. As the debate widens, many observers note that the controversy reveals a deeper tension between creative ownership and modern media distribution. The rapid rise of podcasting has led studios to dust off older material, sometimes without considering how the cultural landscape has shifted. In this case, a project recorded over a decade ago now enters an era shaped by intense scrutiny over consent, representation, and political influence. Some critics argue that releasing a religious project without the performer's awareness risks framing them as endorsing a message they may not currently stand behind. Others say the backlash is overstated, pointing out that the actors were paid for their work and that licensing terms often include broad reuse rights. Still, the moment raises important questions. Should studios be obligated to inform performers before reviving old content? Or is this simply the new reality of digital storytelling? Even amid the turmoil, McDonough has remained steady, projecting the calm confidence of someone who believes deeply in the value of the work. He has described the podcast as a guide for people who don't know where to begin with the Bible, a spiritual roadmap created through voices that bring Scripture to life. He speaks with admiration about his fellow cast members, calling the ensemble an all-star lineup that delivers the emotion and depth these stories deserve. For McDonough, the controversy does not diminish the heart of the project. Instead, he sees its sudden resurgence as an opportunity for millions to rediscover the teachings of Jesus through a modern format. He says the episodes offer listeners not just information, but an experience meant to draw them closer to faith, tradition, and reflection in a fast-moving world. Meanwhile, Fox Faith continues promoting the series aggressively, describing it as a 52-episode immersive audio experience. The platform emphasizes that each segment is crafted to transport listeners into the world of the New Testament, using cinematic sound design and dramatic performances. Early listeners have responded with curiosity, and some have praised the podcast for its accessibility, especially for those who struggle with long-form reading. Yet the project's rollout remains overshadowed by the actors' reactions. Some surprised, others frustrated that their names were attached without notice. Industry analysts say this case may influence future discussions about audio licensing and performer rights. With digital platforms evolving rapidly, they warn that this will not be the last time old recordings resurface unexpectedly, forcing both artists and studios to rethink how past work should be handled in the present. As discussion around the podcast grows, reactions across social media remain sharply divided. Supporters say the series makes Scripture easier to understand, praising the cinematic sound and McDonough's heartfelt approach to portraying Jesus. They argue that any effort to bring the New Testament to modern listeners should be welcomed. Critics, however, believe the sudden release exposes the risks of reviving old recordings without informing the actors involved, especially when the content carries spiritual or cultural weight. Some feel the project places performers in a position they never agreed to publicly support after so many years. Even with the controversy, the podcast continues streaming on major platforms, drawing curiosity from both believers and skeptics. And through it all, McDonough maintains that the true purpose remains unchanged, guiding people through the life of Jesus in a way that feels simple, meaningful, and accessible for today's audience.